Hello everybody, my name is Kat and welcome back to my channel where we talk about all things horror. And today we are doing another horror film catch-up review. And this video is focused on streaming films, specifically 3 movies that I watched on Shudder. I believe all 3 of these are considered like Shudder originals, so they are exclusive to the platform, although I'm sure you could find other places to like rent and buy them. And obviously, you know, I think at this point we all know the quality of streaming films often differs greatly from that of films that get a theatrical release. I'm only saying that because I feel like these 3 films, like, they definitely have that like streaming movie feel. Has streaming become the new like B movie straight to VHS? I feel like it might be. Alright, so let's get into it. So the first film that I saw is Azrael. I think that's how you say the title of that. This is a film that seems to take place in some sort of post-apocalyptic world, although there's definitely questions around what is actually happening in this story. At the beginning of the film, you learn that some sort of rapture has happened. And after this event, you have a collection, a community of people that are living out in the woods. And my understanding is that they've basically made this pact where they agree to not speak. Like, they don't communicate verbally as a, I guess, sacrifice for their sins that presumably caused the rapture to happen. But there's also like questions around like these people are living in the woods might actually just be part of this very strange cult. So the film is primarily following this young woman, Azrael, who is living in the woods, and it seems like she was part of this community and then she either exiled herself or maybe she was pushed out of the community, and then one day her and her boyfriend come across these people from this community and the people try to sacrifice them to these monstrous creatures that are living out in the woods. And again, presumably these are creatures that came about after the rapture. They seem to be some sort of hybrids of like human, demon, zombie-like creatures. And the majority of the film is following Azrael as she is trying to escape these people and these creatures. There's a lot of action that happens within the second and third act. Overall, the gimmick of this film is that there's no dialogue, right? People are not talking. It's completely silent. Kind of like A Quiet Place, I guess, although you do get dialogue in those movies. Whereas this one, like, there's pretty much no talking except for like one scene, and even then the people that are talking in this like other language, so you can't really understand them anyway. So let's start with the positives of this movie. I would say the biggest draw of this film is that you have Samara Weaving, who is playing Azrael. Of course, she's well known for films such as Ready or Not, and she's great in this movie. She's definitely carrying a lot of this film on her back. Even though she's not speaking, I think she does such a great job of projecting the emotions that she's feeling on her face. And again, by the second act, because there's a lot of action that happens, she's also just a total badass in this movie. There are several action-y sequences with her fighting off these monsters, and she's climbing up trees, and she's like taking people down. So she's definitely the biggest positive of this film. I would say if you are a fan of her work, you will probably really enjoy this movie. Another positive for me is just the scenery of the film, so locations of the film. This is primarily taking place within a forest, and you get a lot of really beautiful nature imagery. There's quite a number of scenes where you just have Samara Weaving walking around the woods, or she's by the river, and the way that they film it just looks so gorgeous. They picked a really great location for this, and what I love the most about it is it seemed like they filmed this as the seasons were transitioning over from summer to fall, because some of the leaves are like that luscious green, but then others are more orange and yellow, and it just has that early fall feel. And when this film first started, I was really excited to see that, because I was like, oh, okay, this is fun. This is gonna be like a cozy little fall movie, something that you can put on during September and October. So the natural setting definitely enhances the aesthetics overall. You know, and I love that they kept it really simple too with the location. It's just like the campground. There's this very odd church building that this community built, and just the classic being in the woods setting. And all of our like human history, the woods has been representative of where our deepest, darkest fears about both ourselves and the world tend to hide. And often in stories, it's the place where characters have to go to find themselves in some way. And I actually found the creature designs in here to be pretty freaky. Like the zombie-like creatures or whatever they're supposed to be, they still had a very human quality to them. And that's what I find creepy. Like for something like A Quiet Place, I've never found A Quiet Place to be scary. Like I've said it before in videos, but those movies just don't do that much for me. And that's really because I'm just not a creature person, but human creatures or humanoid-like creatures, that's what I find most creepy. And so that's what I liked about Azrael, is that you have these human-like beings and they're walking in the woods and they're walking all like weird, like they're kind of stumbling over themselves. You'll have moments where Samara Weaving is just like hanging out by a lake and one of these things will pop up behind her out of nowhere, and I found that to be very chilling. I would say I was really into this film for like the first 30 minutes, I guess the first act. It started to lose me a little bit in the second and third act. And it's funny because looking at reviews of this, I seem to have the opposite reaction of other people, whereas other people found the first 30 minutes to be really boring and they really loved the second and third act because of all the action sequences that happened. For me, it was the other way around. Like I liked the really like slow, quiet moments in the beginning, and then the action stuff started to lose me after a while. By the time the film got to the third act into the end, the one question that I had was, what is this film about? What is this film like trying to say? We do have these religious themes here, but again, I just wasn't quite sure like what the film was trying to say about religion or cults. Again, I'm not someone that's well versed in the Bible, so maybe there are like biblical things in here that I'm just not picking up on. But at times it just felt like it wanted to use the religious imagery for the sake of just having weird, creepy religious imagery. You know, and this is kind of the danger of choosing to not use dialogue. I just didn't feel like there was that much character development here, especially with Azrael. I spent most of the movie questioning her character. Like, okay, did she run away from this community of people in the woods? Was she exiled by these people? There's something weird that happens with her character at the end that left me questioning, like, who was this person really throughout most of the movie? I mean, I think my understanding is that Azrael has some sort of biblical connections to the rapture. You know, you have these other like people in the community that keep coming in and out. Like I can kind of get what the film was going for, right? Like you have a woman who seems to be the head of the church and she's pregnant, and my sense is that, you know, this is supposed to be a Mother Mary type character, right? Some sort of like immaculate pregnancy, and I guess the hope being that whatever she gives birth to is going to give some sort of hope back into the world for these people because they keep protecting her. And my question is like, well, did the rapture even happen in this world, or are these people that are just living in some sort of delusion, self-made delusion? And if so, why? Like the rules of this world are never really established. And I guess it's okay if you're just going in for like a quick watch, right? If you just want to see something that has some creepy imagery in it, that has some action in it, like that's okay. It's just, I think for me, in a year where we've had a lot of really great horror films and a lot of great horror films that have explored some really interesting themes and ideas about human nature, films that have explored very like similar ideas around religion or cults or communications with the devil. Something like this just is not going to make it to the top of my list. There were other things about this film too, where it's like you have Samara Weaving, she's taking down like these people in the community, she's taking down these monsters, she's being very resourceful in how she fights off these people. She's strong, she's able to fire off guns, she's able to just get herself out of these very precarious situations and save herself. But then it's like in other moments, she meets up with the pregnant woman, and the woman at one point just like grabs a frying pan and just like hits her over the head with it, and that takes her out. It's like, really, I just saw you in a previous scene like doing all of these like ninja moves on these creatures, and you came away from that without a scratch, but then a frying pan's gonna take you out. So it was just kind of like weird writing choices like that. I don't know. Again, I think this is like perfectly suitable for just like a quick fun watch. It's probably not something that I will go back to. This was written by Simon Barrett, who is also the writer of You're Next and The Guest, two movies which I really love a lot, especially The Guest. I think that film is so underrated. So I really enjoy his previous work. I mean, I know he did do that like Blair Witch movie, but you know, we can forget about that. But as a general rule, I like his stuff, and maybe if he had also directed this movie, it would have had a slightly different feel to it. From just seeing people's reviews online, it seems like the general consensus is that people really do like it, and I can understand why. I don't know, if someone can explain to me what their interpretation of the film was, I'd love to hear it. So the next Shudder film that I watched is Daddy's Head, which has to, get the prize of the dumbest title for a horror film this year. This film follows a young boy and his stepmom who are dealing with the grief of losing the patriarch of the family. And what you learn is that the stepmom, her marriage to this guy is still fairly new. He was previously married, his first wife also passed away. So it's a classic thing of like the stepmom comes in and the kid is, not really taken with her. They don't really get along that well, and then the dad dies and they are forced now to just be with each other. And then some strange supernatural occurrence happens and there's some sort of being or entity that starts creeping around the house and like the location of the house, and the entity is taking on the form of the deceased father and is presenting itself to the kid, and then the kid is like, oh my god, my dad is back, and the stepmom is like, what are you talking about? I am not quite sure what this entity is. The film doesn't really give us a clear answer. This is another one that I was going online and seeing what people were saying about it, and there are a few people that have tossed out the idea that the entity is an alien that crash landed onto Earth and wants to assimilate with the family, and that's why it's taking on the face of the dad. I don't know. You don't actually get that much with the creature or whatever it is, except for really brief glimpses here and there, which I think could have worked to the film's benefit. I think keeping things in the dark, keeping things in the shadows, allowing the audience's imagination to run wild, that definitely has its benefits. I think the problem is that this is just not a great film. I have to be honest, this is another one where I've seen people make comments that they really like it. And unlike the other two Shudder films that I watched, where even if I was lukewarm to it, I could at least understand why other people would like the film. This one, I have no idea. I thought this was so boring. I didn't find the acting that great. Again, I'm not really sure what the themes or the message is supposed to be. Yes, I know it's about grief. We've had a lot of horror films just in the past 10 years that deal with grief and the way that grief can manifest in these very monstrous creatures. I mean, the whole quote elevated horror genre kind of prides itself on that, creating monsters out of bereavement. I just didn't feel like this film offered anything new to that idea or that subgenre. This is getting a lot of comparison to The Babadook. I feel like the reason why The Babadook works well, love or hate that movie, I think what it does really well is get you into the headspace of the mother character. That child at the beginning is so annoying and so obnoxious. Oh my god, you just made Nola! That's you understand what this mother is going through. You understand her frustrations. You understand her anxiety. You understand her anger at the fact that she would lose her spouse and have to deal with this kid on her own. And you kind of do get to the point where it's if she were to do something really bad to this kid, you would kind of get it. And yes, that's awful to say, but that's also what a film like The Babadook is trying to explore. And that definitely heightens up the overall suspense of the movie. Whereas here, I didn't get that from either of the characters. I mean, yes, I can empathize with a young boy not liking his stepmom. I can empathize with a stepmom that is not interested in being a mother and just wanted to be with this guy. But I just feel like that wasn't really explored much with the actions of the characters or even in the dialogue scenes between the two of them. I feel like most of the time you see the young kid and he's, in his room pouting, and then you have the stepmom and she's just like drinking a whole bunch and like passed out in the living room. The film just didn't create that kind of claustrophobic atmosphere for these characters that you get with something like The Babadook. Yeah, I just didn't care about these characters. Again, I didn't think the acting was that great. You have this kid that he sees this brief image of his father and he's running around being like, "Dad's back, Daddy came back for me." And I just had a hard time buying it because the kid presents as older. Like, he looks like he should be, I don't know, maybe 10 at the youngest, 11, 12. It just feels like he should be old enough to know better. And yes, I get it, it's grief and grief makes us do weird things. Yeah, okay. Had it been a younger kid, that might have made more sense, like a toddler. Like, I could see how a younger child would see something that resembles a deceased parent and in their mind think like, oh, my parents came back for them, right? Because they don't understand the world and how things work. But I feel like this kid, like, he seemed old enough, like he should have better understanding. There's also this like creepy guy that's around that claims he's a good friend of the dad, but then he's like trying to make out with his stepmom, and again, just kind of being a creeper overall. I just don't know what this film was trying to say about grief or family. And I feel like anytime the film got somewhat interesting, like anytime there was a somewhat interesting scene, it would either end really abruptly with really nothing happening, or they would just like cut away to something else, right? Again, it's like they would cut away to him pouting in his room, or stepmom taking shots in the kitchen, or they would just cut away to these drone shots. Okay, this is probably a really petty critique on my part, but I've said it before, I'm gonna say it again. I feel like drone shots, anytime I see a film and it starts off with a drone shot or it just cuts away to drone shots as like transition scenes, anytime I see that, I feel like that is the kiss of death for a movie, especially these low budget streaming films. When you only have 90 minutes or 80 minutes to tell a story, good filmmakers, good filmmaking will utilize every single minute that they have. They're not going to waste a shot on showing unnecessary landscape footage. Like, fine, if you want to start your film that way to just show the audience this is the lay of the land, okay, fine. You want to use it for maybe a transition, fine. But it's like to keep going back to it and to keep having these same shots of like, we're gliding over the forest. Like, to me, that always just feels like padding or filler in a movie. And I had this problem with Azrael too. And it's like, you just get that with some of these streaming films where it's like, they just try to pad out the runtime with like unnecessary drone footage, or you know, let's have a close-up of a character walking up the steps and we're gonna like slow the footage down, or we're just gonna have like a bunch of scenes with a dog and the dog's gonna be reacting to something that they hear off screen, and we're just gonna have like several seconds of them barking at nothing. That adds nothing to the story, adds nothing to the characters. It's just a pet peeve of mine. There's a moment within the third act of the movie, this has to be like an hour and 10 minutes into the film, where the stepmom goes to the kid and she's like, I can't do this anymore and I'm leaving, and that's gonna force you to be in a foster home. That was a good moment, and I feel like that should have been the moment that started the film. Start your film with the stakes already raised. To me, that has better tension than, okay, well, I'm gonna go pout in my room, I'm gonna chug a whole bottle of wine and then make out with your dad's best friend. And it might have also given some clearer motivations for this supposed alien creature. Like, again, if we're going off the theories of this film, that the alien really wanted to be a part of this family, then the fact that the family was going to be breaking up would have given the entity more incentive to take on the identity of the dad and try to keep them together. It also doesn't help too, like, if we are going to believe that this is an alien creature, literally the night before I saw Daddy's Head, I went back and revisited Under the Skin, which is another movie with aliens and this idea of humanity and connection. And so it's like, to go from something like that to Daddy's Head, like, and I feel like the ending, like the final battle with this creature, is so uninteresting and so anticlimactic, and again just ends very abruptly, and there's not even that much of a battle to it, and it was just like, okay, I'm sorry, I just did not like this one at all. And then the final film that I watched is MadS, M-A-D with a capital S, I believe. This is a French film. about this young man who starts off the film going to his dealer's house, and you see him like snorting some kind of drugs, right? He's getting drugs to take to this party that he's going to later. And on his drive from his dealer's house back to his home, he gets stopped by this young woman who is just running around in the road, and she has all these bandages on her. She's acting very strange. She can't speak that well. And she gets in the car and then immediately like slits her own throat. Like she starts like hurting herself. He's on drugs. He's freaking out. There's blood everywhere, and he doesn't want to call the cops because of course he has drugs. So in his altered state, he just drives back to his house with this woman in the car. And then from there, he also starts acting strangely. Like you can tell there's something like physically going on with him. And there's the question throughout the film of like, is this the drugs that are doing this? Is this just a really bad trip? Or is there some sort of zombie-like virus that is infecting these people? And of course he does end up going to this party and meeting up with his girlfriend and all of his friends, and so they also become contaminated at certain points. And probably the biggest thing to know about this film is supposedly all done in one take. Supposedly the film was shot in one continuous take. I have my questions about that. I do know that the filmmakers and the actors, they went out on 5 nights, I believed, and filmed the whole thing. There are moments here and there though where I was like, okay, if they wanted to make a cut and use footage from a different night, like you could tell where they probably would have sneakily put those in there. But that's kind of the gimmick of this movie, right? It's kind of one of those movies that's trying to do something cool on a technical level, isn't really that much concerned with things like character development or having any sort of like deep storytelling. Like this is really a film to watch for the technical achievements. I will say out of the 3 films that I watched, I think this one was probably my favorite. Again, it was just really cool to see how they were pulling this off with the one take, but also the acting in this film is amazing. The 3 actors that play the main characters that we're following in this movie, they were all so good, and they did such a great job of portraying this like zombie quality. Again, it's not so much zombies and how we would think of them in something like, you know, The Walking Dead, for example. They're still very human, and, you know, they just start doing like weird like body twitches and like making growling noises. But I felt like the actors did such a good job of portraying that, and I feel like you could tell they were having a lot of fun just getting to go out in the streets of this town and just go completely crazy. So I had fun just with the actors in this. I thought they did a really great job. And what's interesting about the film is the way that it takes you along with different characters, because again, you're in this like party setting, and so you'll have something where you have one character and then another character will come into frame and they'll have a conversation. The second character will leave, but the camera will follow them. So it allows you to get different perspectives. I really love the use of colors in this film. Red is definitely the dominant hue within the color scheme. And if you watch the film, there's really creative ways that they're bringing in the color red into these various scenes. I'm sure that they probably did some post-production work to help bring in that color scheme. But I just like that you had that theme throughout the movie. Definitely gives it a very hellish quality. There's also really great gore effects in here. For those of you that like blood, there's plenty of that in this movie. What I liked about the story is these characters are taking on this like zombified form, but it's not like the traditional zombie movie. I think what's creepy about the way that it's being presented here is that these characters, even as they're changing and transitioning, they still have a sense of self about them. They still have a sense of who they are, and they do have a sense that something is wrong with them. And even when they do make the full transition, they still have moments of clarity. They're still like talking and communicating with people, but they're very crude. They have an almost like deadite quality to them, and they just kind of get enjoyment out of going around and like scaring people on the street. But then the character will like kind of come to and be like apologizing and be like, no, this isn't me, like I'm sorry. And it felt like a refreshing take, again, because it is more focused on this technical feat that it's trying. You're not getting a lot of character developments here. Like I said, there's not a lot of story happening. In fact, there are a lot of scenes that at times can feel a little dragged out because you're following these characters and they're just like driving in a car or they're riding on a bike, and you have these very long sequences of just watching them doing that. I think because of that, for some people, they're gonna find this film to get a bit stale and boring, especially towards the second and third act. And again, this is another one where I'm just like, is the message like supposed to be an anti-drug movie? Is this a movie that, and I was just like commenting on certain like cultural things, like doing drugs and partying turns one into a zombified creature? Like, I don't know, but I think that's probably stretching it. I did enjoy this one the most just because it was a fairly simple premise, and I did think the acting was incredible, but I do feel like it got a bit stale as it went on, and it's a fairly short movie. It's only like 80 minutes, but I feel like something similar to Azrael, like the gimmick just kind of runs thin after a while, after the 30-minute mark. As far as like French horror films go, and French horror films that are also streaming exclusively on Shudder, I would still recommend Infested, which I saw earlier this year, but that's still by far, I feel like, the best streaming horror film that I've watched this year. Those are my thoughts on some of the recent Shudder offerings. Again, I would probably say if you're in the mood for something quick and that you don't have to think that much about, I would say try Azrael and MadS. Have you seen any of these films? What did you think about them? How did you interpret them? Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below, and I will see you next time. Thank you so much for watching.